We're in a season of Easter, which really is the center of gravity of the Christian faith. Christmas, because of the way that it's been adopted by the world, the culture at large, and sometimes kind of stripped of its theological meaning, seems to be the bigger holiday, but Easter really is what holds it all together. Easter is what grounds all of Jesus' life, his incarnation, his teachings, his ministry, his death. It all finds its source in his resurrection. Like St. Paul says in the letter to the first letter to the Corinthians, if Christ is not raised from the dead, we are to be pitied most among all people. And so our theme for this Easter season is the way of the resurrection. The way of the cross has led us here. And yet we have not left the way of the cross behind. We instead have found the way of the cross transformed. It continues through the resurrection, but it is changed. The resurrection holds all things, including the cross, together. Jesus begins our gospel passage this morning. And let me just take a moment to say, Jesus didn't sit down and write anything out. I think that's one of the things that can be hard for us to remember. Sometimes the way that we read the scriptures in short chunks, or the ways that we have it taught to us or preached. Sometimes we can lose sight of the fact that Jesus isn't the one sitting down and writing this out. And some of that's like our manners of speaking. Like I just said, Jesus begins this gospel passage. Jesus is the one speaking, not the one writing. So maybe a better way of saying it is, at the beginning of this gospel passage, Jesus says to his disciples, "Let not your hearts be troubled." Let not your hearts be troubled. That's a whole word in itself. Perhaps more than any other word that we need to hear from Jesus. That's the one we need. Because there are many things that could trouble our hearts. Many things that indeed do trouble our hearts. About our personal lives, or about the state of the world. But Jesus speaks to us, "Let not your hearts be troubled." And he doesn't say that to us because the things that trouble us don't matter. Let's be very clear about that. Jesus is not saying none of this matters, and so therefore you don't have to worry. What Jesus is saying to us, we're able to pick up the sense of because of what he says next. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. Believe in God. Believe also in me. I have a friend named Bob, who was a minister, and sometimes when he was feeling spicy, he would say, "Believe in Bob, believe also in me." Not funny? Okay, all right. Have we gone too long already this morning? To believe in God is to not merely agree with a set of bullet points on a piece of paper. To believe in God is to exercise faith in God. And the exercise of faith looks a lot more like trust. 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 When you trust in someone, or when you ask someone to trust in you, what you're doing doing is asking them to enter into a relationship, one of mutual benefit. What you might be asking for is something that looks a lot like allegiance. I'm committing myself to you. Trust in God, trust also in me. Jesus says, let not your hearts be troubled, not because the things that trouble us aren't real or aren't important, but because our trust in God will sustain us through our troubles. Our trust in Jesus, our allegiance to Jesus, will be greater than that which troubles us. To have a troubled heart is to risk, let me say it this way. To have a troubled heart without belief in God is to risk making very grave mistakes. It's to risk thinking that whatever troubles you is what is ultimate. It's to risk thinking that whatever troubles you is what is most true about you and the world in this moment. Brian Stevenson is a lawyer and an advocate for justice. He established and leads the Equal Justice Initiative based in Montgomery, Birmingham, based in Alabama. The Equal Justice Initiative was founded after he took his first case as a public defender and found that the person he was defending, who had been accused of murder, was not actually guilty of that murder, and therefore his place on death row was incredibly tenditious. He worked incredibly hard to rescue that person from the consequences of actions for which he was not guilty. One of the things that Brian Stevenson says to help people who do not have a lot of understanding or contact with the criminal justice system, to help them understand that even if somebody is guilty of something as heinous as murder, to help them understand that the way to right that wrong is not to kill yet another person. He says, nobody is as bad as the worst thing they have ever done. That's hard. That's a hard word to receive, especially if you are the one who loves the one that has been killed. But what if you love the one who did the killing? What if you love the one who did the killing and you are as troubled by that killing as anything that you've ever been troubled by? And yet your love remains. Then isn't the news that nobody is as bad as the worst thing that they've ever done some kind of solace to you? I ask that question because if you find yourself in a very troubling situation and you feel like this situation is going to define the rest of your life and the only way that you know how to deal with it is to do something horrible, wouldn't it be better to have something bigger than that situation to look to rely on, to trust in, to get you out of the kind of troubled and backwards and deformed thinking that would convince you that I have to do whatever it takes to get myself out of this situation? I'm not trying to equate nobody is as bad as the worst thing that they've ever done with let not your hearts be troubled. I'm not at all trying to equate those two statements. But what I'm trying to do is paint a picture to say that of course the things that trouble our hearts are troubled. If they weren't, then our hearts wouldn't be troubled. And Jesus does not encourage us to think about his way of saving us as like an evacuation or an ejection seat. Jesus is not going to somehow remove us from our circumstances that we find ourselves in. What Jesus promises is to come into that situation with us, to sustain us through that situation, and to say, this is not what's ultimate about your life. This is not the truest thing about you. This is not the truest thing about the world. You do not have to give yourself over to whatever it is that you think you have to do to get yourself out of this situation. Because I am with you. Believe in God, believe also in me. Because in my Father's house are many rooms. See, there is a place for you. I have a place for you. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare that place for you? And if I go and prepare that place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. The word for place, the word for room in this passage is the little ordinary Greek word mone. It's not a special word. It's the word for a room, a place. It's a very noun-y kind of word. But the reason that it's interesting here is because of the word that comes later in John chapter 15, verse 4, when Jesus says, abide in me. Because that word abide is the Greek word minnow. And you can hear the play on words that Jesus is working with here. I have a mone for you. I'm going to bring you to that mone so that you may minnow with me. Do you hear it? Jesus is creating a place for us that we might be in that place with him. He talks about going to his Father's house and preparing a place for us so that he can come back and get us and take us to that place. I loved the way that Nathan framed that up for our kids. It reminded me of the way that my best friend growing up and we loved being with each other so much that we had this special power somehow to convince our parents that if one of us stayed the night at one house on Friday night, boy, we were going to get Saturday night at the other person's house. Did any of you have that when you were growing up? When Jay moved away in 7th grade, it was like one of the hardest days of my life. I got to spend the night at his house on a weeknight, a school night, the day before they left. The way that households, homes, families worked back then is that if you were preparing to be married, the way that Joseph and Mary were preparing to be married, what Joseph would do is, in the house that he grew up in, he would add on to it. He would work with his father and his brothers to make more place in the place where he already lived. He wasn't going to move to the other side of Bethlehem or Nazareth, as it were. Bethlehem, that's just where Jesus was born. He wasn't going to find a different street in Nazareth to build a new house on. He wasn't going to move into the countryside to acquire more land. He was going to literally just add a mone to the side of his father's house. And he was going to bring Mary from her father's house to his father's house so that they could live in that mone together. And in that mone they would minnow. Jesus is saying that the same way that a husband would make a place for his bride, for his new family that he's establishing in the household that he's coming from, he is doing that with us, for us. So that we might be with him. Always. And it's really I think it's very easy to think about this in terms of eternity, but that's only part of what Jesus is trying to communicate to us. This is not simply about our ultimate destiny. This is about life today. That's why John 15 comes after John 14. He wants us to abide in him, the same way that a branch is connected to a vine. And he doesn't want that just for when you're passing from this life to the next. He wants that for your life here, today, now. He wants you abiding with him. He wants you remaining with him. He wants you staying with him. So that wherever you find yourself in this wide, wild world, you are somehow still anchored, placed. Thomas asks a question. Let me get my verbs correct here. Thomas asks Jesus a question. Lord, we do not know where you're going. How can we know the way? And Jesus says to him, I am the way. I am the way. Sometimes this is such a beautiful and succinct statement from Jesus that sometimes we isolate it from the question and we say, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. But if you think about it in terms of the imagery that he's using about building a household, making a family, no one comes to the Father except through me. You're not just going to move into my dad's house. I'm going to make that place for you. I'm going to bring you to where my family is from, and you're going to become part of my family now. We don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? And Jesus answers, I am the way. He doesn't hand us a map or a set of coordinates. He offers himself. He says, I am that way. I am the one who's going to gather you up and bring you with me. The way is a person. The way is a person. Which person? What person? This picks up Philip's question. Philip says, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Again, that Father's house imagery. Show us the Father, and that's enough. Which person? What person, Jesus? And Jesus said, have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. Again, Thomas's question, Philip's question. They're asking questions that troubled hearts ask. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what to expect. We're getting a little bit nervous. You're talking about leaving. We don't know where you're going. We don't know who you're trying to introduce us to. We don't know what's going on. Jesus, we're troubled, and Jesus, he steps into those questions and he says, let not your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. Show us the way, I am the way. Show us the Father. If you've seen me, you have seen the Father. Jesus. He wants us to abide in the place that he's making for us. He wants that to happen as soon as possible. He does not want that deferred until the end of your life. He does not want that deferred until your deathbed. He does not want that deferred for the next whatever comes after this. He wants that today. There's this really interesting language that starts to spring up towards the end of the 2nd century and the beginning of the 3rd century when Christian thinkers and pastors are trying to understand this. They don't make up, but they use a word that's not in the Bible to describe this kind of the way that Jesus is in the Father and the Father is in Jesus and we are in Jesus and so we're in the Father. And they use this word called perichoresis. It does not translate well into English. You have to use lots of words to figure out what it means. The closest we can get, I think, is to describe perichoresis as a mutual indwelling. I'm in you, you're in me. And if we're in Jesus, then that means we are wherever he is. And theologians, they use this to describe the way that humanity and divinity come together perfectly in Jesus. They also use it to describe the relationships between the persons of the Trinity, the way that the Father is not the Son is not the Spirit is not the Father, the Spirit is not the Son, and yet they are all God, and only one God. This is a living relationship. This is why part of our watchword for this year is life with the living God, because I don't want our relationship with God to look like agreeing with a set of bullet points on a page. There might be moments when that's the best we can do. There might be moments where your faith is really troubled, your heart is really troubled, and the best you can do is look at those bullet points and say, whether I feel it or not, this is what I believe, this is what I agree with. But we're given the gift of one another. When Peter writes to those disciples in Turkey who are struggling, listen to the language that he uses. As you come to him, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. You're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession. Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles. All of those yous are plural. The same way that there are many rooms in my Father's house, there's enough space for all of us. We are given one another as part of this gift of being in God. Because if Jesus is in the Father, and the Father is in Jesus, and we are in Jesus, and therefore we're in the Father, but I'm in Jesus and you're in Jesus, that means we're both in Jesus. That means we have the gift of one another in Jesus. We are being made to be a people, not just persons. And all of this is aimed at this family being given a place to be in this world. A place in this world where the things that trouble us are not unendurable. The things that upset us are not ultimate. The things that would cause us to question who I am, what's going on, what this means, does God care? We find in one another the gift of Jesus, because Jesus has given us rightly the gift of one another. That our life together might be the work of God. Truly, truly, I say to you, says Jesus, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do. And greater works than these will he do, because I am going to the Father. Jesus has prepared a place for us. That place is available for us now in light of his resurrection, right? He's not talking to them about what's going to happen when he goes to heaven. He's talking about what's going to happen in his death and resurrection in John 14. And that all happens in the context of the Last Supper, where Jesus washes his disciples' feet before they share a meal together. So I want to be as clear as I possibly can that this is the place that Jesus has prepared for you. And in this place, we will receive not just the gift of Jesus, but we will receive a family to which we belong. Let's take a few moments to quiet ourselves as we prepare to come